Recapitulation. When revising my notes, I discovered that another topic Carlos repeatedly referred to in his talks was the concept of recapitulation. He claimed that it is the exercise to which sorcerers dedicate most of their time. Once he remarked that, in spite of the energy drainage we are subjected to through social interaction, we all have an option, because the sealed nature of our luminous configuration allows us to restart from zero any time and to recover our totality. It is never too late, he said. While we are alive, there is always a way of conquering any kind of blockage. The best way to recover the luminous fibers we have lost is by calling our energy back. The most important part is to take the first step. For those who are interested in saving and recovering their energy, the only way open to us is the recapitulation. A sorcerer knows that if we don't go for our ghosts, they will come for us. For that reason, he leaves nothing unresolved. He recounts his past, looks for the magical joint, the exact moment when he was involved in somebody's destiny, applies all his concentration to that point, and unties the knots of intent. Sorcerers say that we live our life from a distance, as if it were a memory. We spend life hooked, hurt by something that happened 30 years ago, and carrying a burden that doesn't make sense anymore. I don't forgive it, we scream, but it is not true. It is ourselves we don't forgive. The emotional commitments we make with people are like investments we have made along the way. We must be completely insane to leave our heritage thrown away like that. The only way we can become complete again is by picking up that investment, reconciling ourselves with our energy, and dissipating the heavy burden of feelings. The best method the sorcerers have discovered for this is to remember the events of our personal history until we have completely digested them. Recapitulation takes you out of the past and inserts you into the now. We cannot escape having been born as bored fucks, nor having invested most of our luminosity in making children or in maintaining tiring relationships. But we can recapitulate. It cancels out the energetic effects of those acts. Fortunately, in the realm of energy, things like time and space don't exist. So it is possible to return to the place and to the same moment when the events happened and relive them. It is not very difficult, since we all know very well where we are hurting. To recapitulate is to stalk our routines, subjecting them to a systematic and merciless scrutiny. It is an activity that allows us to visualize our life as a totality and not just as a succession of moments. However, and although this may seem strange, only sorcerers recapitulate as an exercise. Other people only happen to do it by chance. Recapitulation is the heritage of the old seers, the basic practice, the essence of sorcery. Without it, there is no path. Don Juan used to despairingly refer to apprentices who had not been recapitulated as radioactive. Don Genaro would not even shake hands with me, and if I touched him accidentally, he would run to wash himself as if I had infected him. He said I was full of dirt, and it was seeping out through every pore of my skin. With that comedy routine, he installed in me the idea that recapitulating is an elementary act of hygiene. In another lecture, Carlos referred to a kind of luminous stagnation, which he described as a fixation of our attention that blocks the flow of energy. He said that this happens when we refuse to face facts and try to protect ourselves by hiding behind evasive actions. Also, when we leave pending matters unresolved or make commitments that tie us down. The consequence of that kind of stagnation is that the person ceases to be himself. When being pressured by the chain of decisions that he has made during his life, he can no longer act in a deliberate manner, and he becomes entangled in the circumstances. This situation can escalate to the point of mental or physical illness and can be resolved only through recapitulation. He maintained that in essence, to recapitulate consists of making a list of wounds caused by our interactions. The next step is to travel back to the moment when the events took place in order to reabsorb what belongs to us and return what belongs to others. The warrior begins rewinding his day. He reconstructs conversations, deciphers meanings, remembers faces and names, looks for shades and insinuations, dissects his own emotional reactions and those of others. He doesn't leave anything to chance. Grabs the memories of the day one by one and cleans them through his breathing. He also examines entire chapters and categories of his life. For example, partners he has had, houses he has lived in, schools, workplaces, friends and enemies, fights and happy moments, and so on. The ideal thing is to attack the task in chronological order, from the most recent memory until the most distant that it is possible to evoke. But in the beginning, it is easier to do it by topics. A very profitable form of the exercise, accessible to all of us, is the fortuitous recapitulation. If you think about it, we are constantly recapitulating. All memories which conform to our internal dialogue can be called that. However, we evoke them in an involuntary way. Instead of stalking them in silence, we judge them and interact with them viscerally. That is pitiful. A warrior takes advantage of the opportunity because those memories, seemingly random, are warnings from our silent side. He pointed out that to recapitulate, no special conditions are necessary. We can try the exercise anytime, any place, wherever we feel moved to do it. Warriors recapitulate when they are walking down the road, in the bathroom, when working, or when eating, whenever it is possible. The important thing is to do it. He added that it takes no definite posture. The only requirement is to be comfortable, so the physical body doesn't demand attention or interfere with the memories. However, sorcerers take the exercise very seriously. Some use wooden boxes, raised sleeping platforms, closets, or caves. Others build a seat in the highest branches of a big tree, or dig a hole in the ground and cover it with branches. A good practice is to recapitulate sitting on the bed, in darkness, before lying down to sleep. Whatever isolates us from the environment is good for formal recapitulation. Once we have located an event and recreated each of its parts, we have to inhale to recover the energy that we left behind and exhale the fibers that others deposited in us. Breathing is magical because it is a function that gives life. Carlos explained that this kind of breathing should be accompanied by a lateral movement of the head, which sorcerers call to fan the event. Somebody asked him if it is necessary to breathe from right to left, or vice versa. He answered, "What does it matter? It is energy work. There is no fixed pattern. What counts is the intent. Breathe in when you try to recover something, and blow back all that doesn't belong to you. If you do that with the totality of your history, you will stop living entangled in a chain of memories, and instead, you will be focused in the present." Seers describe that effect as facing facts as they are, or seeing time objectively. They asked him what we have to do with our memories once we locate them, whether it means to examine them with some psychoanalytical method or something like that. He answered, "It is not necessary to do anything in particular. Memories will find their own course, and luminosity is reordered by itself through the breathing. Just try it. Make yourself available. The Spirit will tell you how to do it." Recapitulation starts from inside and sustains itself. It is a matter of silencing the mind, and our energy body will take control, doing what is a delight for it to do. You feel well, comforted. Far from draining you, it gives you rest. Your body perceives it as an inexplicable energy bath. But you should have the correct attitude. Don't confuse the exercise with a psychological question. If what you need is interpretations, go to the psychiatrist. He will tell you what to do to continue being the idiot that you are. Neither should you try to find a lesson. Stories with a moral only exist in children's books. Recapitulation is a specialized form of stalking and should be undertaken with a high sense of strategy. It is about understanding and putting our existence in order, seeing it as it is, without remorse, reproaches, or congratulations, with total indifference and in a spirit of fluidity, even of humor, because nothing in our history is more important than anything else. And all relationships in the end are ephemeral. The important thing is to begin, because the energy we recover from the first intent will give us the power to continue recapitulating more and more intricate aspects of our lives. First, it is necessary to go for the strongest investments, which are the most harrowing feelings. Then we go for those memories that are buried so deeply that we thought we had forgotten them. But they are there. In the beginning, recapitulation can be hard work because our mind is not accustomed to that discipline. But after closing the most painful wounds, energy will recognize itself, and we become addicted to the exercise. In that way, each particle of light which we recover helps us to gain more. The moment you begin to prepare to voluntarily unravel the plots of your personal history, you will be taking a decisive step. Responding to another question, he said that recapitulation doesn't have an end. It should last until the end of our days and beyond. I stretch my fibers every night while remembering what happened during the day. This way, my list of events stays updated. But once a year, I give myself over to a more complete and total exercise, for which I move away from everything for several weeks. He warned us that just because it's a daily practice, we must not see the exercise as a routine. If we don't recover the totality of our energy, we will never achieve the power of our decisions. There will always be a background noise, a foreign command. And without the power of his decisions, a man is nothing. Reliving events is ideal because it cleans the wounds of the past and clears up any congestion of the energy conduits. In this way, you break the fixation of other people's gaze. You expose the patterns of people's behavior, and nothing can hook you again. You become a sovereign being. You decide what you want to make of yourself. Another question concerned the effects of recapitulation on awareness. He maintained that the exercise has two main effects. The immediate effect is that it stops our internal dialogue. When a warrior is able to stop his dialogue, he tightens the relationship with his energy. It liberates him from the obligation of memory and from the burden of feelings, and leaves the residual energy that he can invest in enlarging the frontiers of his perception. A warrior begins to appreciate the real thing, not the interpretation of it. For the first time, he comes into contact with the consensus of sorcerers, which is the description of a reality inconceivably integrated. It's normal that a warrior at this stage begins to laugh at anything, because energy provides happiness. Thanks to his recapitulation, he is happy, overflowing, jumps like a child. On the other hand, he begins to become a fearsome person, since having his luminosity intact and his life clean, decisions will no longer be an obstacle for him. He will decide what is necessary the moment he wants to, and that, to other people, is scary. This is also the time when the warrior requires an extra dose of sobriety and sanity, because without it, he would take unnecessary risks, endangering both his own security and the security of others. Another effect of recapitulation is that it works as an invitation to the spirit and makes it want to come and live with us. In other words, to remember our past is the most effective method to unite the physical body and the energy body, which have been separated for years. He went on to say that the sorcerer who has managed to compress the thickest part of his energy is in a state where he may intend a feat of perceptual prowess, intending a copy of his life experience in order to deceive death. That is the final objective of recapitulation, to create a double and get ready to leave. You don't have to be a sorcerer to understand the importance of all this. To die in debt is a pitiful way of dying. On the other hand, to have a double to offer the eagle guarantees that you will be able to continue ahead. The fight of sorcerers is heroic. Recapitulating impeccably the content of their lives, they pick up the fibers which drain their attention, and return to those they have known all the attention they have given them. In that way, they arrive at a state of balance, which allows them to leave with all their awareness. Their memories, coherent, refined, and integrated, work as an independent being, which serves as a ticket they hand over in exchange for their awareness. The eagle accepts that effort as a payment and steps aside. Our replica is sufficient to satisfy its demand. Seers see that moment as an explosion of energy, which aligns their encapsulated awareness with the totality of emanations out there, and their assemblage point expands infinitely, like a vortex of light. In another talk, he referred to a method designed by the new seers which can be helpful in the exercise of recapitulation. He stated, "One of the tasks of sorcerers is to constantly analyze the insinuations of the spirit. For this purpose, they often use a book of memorable events, a map of those occasions when the spirit intervened in their lives, forcing them to make decisions, voluntarily or involuntarily." He explained that the advantage of this technique is that when we write, we detach ourselves from things and events, at least to a minimal extent, and thus we are able to focus on them with more objectivity. It is not about describing our daily routines, but of being attentive to the strange moments in which intent is manifested. Those are magical junctures because they produce changes, and they put us face to face with the meaning of our existence. As requested, he gave us some examples of this kind of events. Although signs of the spirit are a personal matter, there are ordinary events that in general mark people's life, like being born, choosing a career, intertwining your destiny with another person, or having children. Also, illnesses and serious accidents, because they establish a nexus with death. For those who have the fortune of finding a conduit of spirit in the shape of a Nagual, this is certainly the most memorable event of all. The interventions of intent are precursors, very significant memories for a warrior, and they can be used as reference points of where to start when one is exploring episodes of personal history. It requires speed and clarity to select them and to synthesize them, extracting the personal stuff and leaving the magical essence. When properly done, they become what the new seers call abstract centers of perception, a matrix of intent, which a warrior has the duty of deciphering. The threshold of silence. One of Carlos's characteristics was that he was unpredictable. Sometimes he arrived on time to his appointments. Other times he was an hour late. The system had its advantages. It made the less interested stand up and leave, and forced the more committed to cultivate patience. That afternoon, the appointment was at the University of Mexico. Among many other questions, he was asked if he believed in God. In answering, Carlos asked us not to confuse his words with a religious message. Sorcerers, he said, abide by their experience. They have changed believing for seeing. They speak of the Spirit, not because they believe in its existence, but because they have seen it. But they don't see it as a loving Father who watches over us from up above. For them, the Spirit is something much more direct and immediate, a state of awareness which transcends reason. Everything that reaches our senses is a sign. The only thing you need to have is the necessary speed to silence your mind and capture the message. By means of these indications, Spirit talks to us in a very clear voice. One of the people present remarked that even taken as a metaphor, the idea of listening to the spirit or speaking with it had an excessively religious air. But Carlos was adamant in his definition. That voice is not a metaphor, it is literal. Sometimes it speaks in words. Other times it just whispers or presents a scene before our eyes, like a movie. In that way, the Spirit transmits its commands to us, which can be summarized in a single expression: intent. Intent. The voice of the Spirit speaks equally to everyone, but we don't realize it. We are so preoccupied with our thoughts that instead of making silence and listening, we prefer all kinds of subterfuges. That's why the reminding voice exists. They asked him what the reminding voice was. He answered, "It's a resource of attention, a way of accessing another level of awareness. We can use almost anything to tune in to the Spirit, because finally it is behind all that exists. But certain things attract us more than others. In general, people have their prayers, their amulets, or elaborate rituals, private and collective. The ancient sorcerers were prone to mysticism. They used astrology, oracles, and incantations, magical sticks, anything that could deceive the vigilance of reason. But for the new seers, those resources are a waste and hide a danger. They can deviate a person's attention so that, instead of focusing on his immediate bond with the Spirit, he becomes addicted to symbols. Today's warriors prefer less ostentatious methods. Don Juan recommended intending inner silence directly. Emphasizing the words, he specified that sorcery is the art of silence. Silence is a passageway between worlds. When our mind stays silent, incredible aspects of our being emerge. Starting from that moment, a person becomes a vehicle of intent, and all his acts begin to ooze power. During my apprenticeship, my benefactor showed me inexplicable feats which frightened me, but at the same time stirred up my ambition. I wanted to be as powerful as he was. I often asked him how I could learn his tricks, but he placed a finger on his lips and stared at me. It took years before I could appreciate the magnificent lesson of his answer. The key to sorcery is silence. One of those present asked him to define that concept. He answered, "It is not definable. When you practice it, you perceive it. If you try to understand it, you block it. Don't see it as something difficult or complex, because it is not something from another world. It is just silencing the mind." I could tell you that silence is like a dock where ships arrive. If the dock is occupied, there is no space for anything new. That's my image of the matter. But the truth is, I don't know how to speak about it. He explained that inner silence is not only the absence of thoughts, rather, it is about suspending judgment, witnessing without interpreting. He maintained that entering silence could be defined, in the typically contradictory way of sorcerers, as learning how to think without words. For many of you, What I am saying doesn't make sense because you are accustomed to consult your mind about everything. The ironic thing is that, for starters, our thoughts are not even ours. They sound through us, which is different. And since they have been pestering us ever since we learned to use our reason, we have ended up getting used to them. If you ask the mind, it will tell you that the purpose of sorcerers is nonsense because it cannot be rationally demonstrated. Instead of advising you to go and verify that purpose honestly, it will order you to hide behind a solid block of interpretations. Therefore, if you want to have a chance, there is only one possible way out. Disconnect the mind. Freedom is achieved without thinking. I know people who are able to stop their internal dialogue. They no longer interpret. They are pure perception. They are never disappointed or regretful because everything they do starts from the center for decisions. They have learned to deal with their mind in terms of authority, and they live in the most authentic state of freedom. He continued by saying that silence is our natural condition. We were born from silence, and there we will return. What contaminates us are all the superfluous ideas that percolate through us due to our collective way of living. Our relatives, the primates, have very ingrained social customs whose objective is to diminish the levels of tension inside the group. For example, they dedicate much of their time to caressing each other, smelling each other, or picking each other's lice. Those customs are genetic, so they have not died. They are here inside, within you and within me. It's just that human beings have learned how to replace them with the exchange of words. Every time we have an opportunity, we tranquilize each other by talking about something. After millennia of coexistence, we have internalized these exchanges to the point that, whether we are asleep or awake, our mind is never quiet. It is always talking to itself. Don Juan affirmed that we are predatory animals who, by the power of domestication, have been converted into grass eaters. We spend our lives regurgitating an endless list of opinions on almost everything. We receive thoughts in clusters. One connects with the other one until the entire space of the mind is packed full. That noise has no use because practically in its entirety, it is devoted to the enlargement of the ego. Because it goes against everything that we've been taught since we were children, silence should be attempted in a spirit of combat. At this time, you have a great advantage: the experience of stalkers. Sorcerers nowadays recommend that we pass through the world without getting any attention, treating everything equally. A warrior stalker becomes the owner of the situation, for better or for worse, because there is something terribly effective about acting without the mind. They asked him to give us some practical exercises to achieve silence. He answered that was a very private matter, because the sources of the internal dialogue are fed by our personal history. However, through millennia of practice, sorcerers have observed that deep down we are very similar, and there are situations that have the effect of silencing all of us. My teacher gave me various techniques to silence my mind, which, well understood, can be reduced to one: Intent. Silence is intended crudely, making the effort. It is about insisting over and over again. It does not mean to repress our thoughts, but rather learning how to control them. Silence begins with a command, an act of will, which becomes the command of the ego. However, we must keep in mind that as long as we impose silence on ourselves, we will never truly be there, but in the imposition. We have to learn to transform will into intent. Silence is calm. It is to yield, to let yourself go. It produces a sensation of absence, like the one a child feels when he stares at fire. How wonderful to remember that feeling and know that it can be evoked again. Silence is the fundamental condition of the path. I spent a lot of years battling to achieve it, but all I did was get entangled in my own attempt. In addition to the habitual conversation that was always going on in my mind, I began to blame myself for not being able to understand what it was that Don Juan expected from me. Everything changed one day while I was absent-mindedly contemplating some trees. Silence came rushing from them like a wild beast, stopping my world and hurtling me into a paradoxical state, for it was new and at the same time well known. The technique of observation, that is, of contemplating the world without preconceived ideas, works very well with the elements, for example, with flames, running water, cloud formations, or the sunset. The new seers call it to deceive the machine, because in essence it consists of learning to intend a new description. We have to fight boldly to get it, but after it happens, the new state of awareness is sustained naturally. You have a foot inside the door. The door is already open, and it is just a matter of accumulating enough energy to pass through to the other side. It's important that our intent is intelligent. The effort it takes to achieve silence would count for nothing if we didn't first create conditions favorable to sustaining it. Therefore, besides the training and observation of the elements, a warrior is forced to do something very simple but very difficult: ordering his life. We all live in a chain of intensity, which we call time. Since we can't see its source, we never stop to think of its end. While we are young, we feel eternal. And when we grow old, the only thing left is to complain about the wasted time. But that is an illusion. Time is not wasted. We waste ourselves. The idea that we have time is a misunderstanding that makes us waste energy on all kinds of commitments. When a man connects with inner silence, he puts a new value on his time. So another way to define it would be to say that silence is an acute awareness of the present. An infallible method for reaching silence is not doing, an activity that we program with our mind, but which has the virtue of silencing our thoughts once it is in motion. Don Juan called that kind of technique to remove one thorn with another. As examples of not doings, he mentioned listening in the dark, changing the priority of our senses, and the command that compels us to fall asleep as soon as we close our eyes. Also, to talk with plants, to stand on our heads, to walk backwards, to observe the shadows and the distance, or spaces between the leaves of trees. All those activities are among the most effective to silence our internal dialogue. But they have a defect. We cannot sustain them for a long time. After a while, we are forced to return to our routines. A not doing that is exaggerated will automatically lose its power and become a doing. If what we want is to accumulate deep silence with a lasting effect, the best not doing is solitude. Together with energy saving and abandoning those who consider us facts, learning how to be alone is the third practical principle of the path. The warrior's world is the most solitary thing there is. Even when several apprentices unite to travel the routes of power together, each one knows that he is alone, that he cannot expect anything from the others, nor can he depend on anybody. The only thing he can do is to share his path with those who accompany him. To be alone requires a great effort because we haven't learned how to overcome the genetic command of socialization yet. In the beginning, an apprentice should be forced by his teacher, through traps if necessary. But after a while, he learns how to enjoy it. It is normal that sorcerers look for silence in the solitude of mountains or in the desert, and that they live alone during long periods. Somebody commented that this was a hideous perspective. Carlos replied, "Hideous is to spend our old age like weeping children." One of the ironies of modern life is that the more communication increases, the more solitary we feel. Ordinary man's existence is one of harrowing loneliness. He looks for company, but cannot find himself. His love has been devaluated. His dream is pure fantasy. His natural curiosity has become a strictly personal concern, and the only thing he has left is his attachments. On the other hand, the warrior's solitude is like a lover's retreat, a place for those who seek a remote niche to write poems to their love. And the warrior's love is everywhere, because it is this earth where he will wander for such a brief time. So wherever he goes, the warrior surrenders to his romance. Naturally, he will sometimes avoid dealing with the world. Inner silence is solitary. Carlos went on to say that the sorcerers of antiquity used power plants to stop the internal dialogue. But today's warriors prefer less risky and more controlled conditions. The same results produced by power plants can be obtained when we are up against the wall, facing extreme situations like danger, fear, sensorial saturation, and aggression. Something in us reacts and takes control. The mind becomes alert and automatically suspends its chatter. Deliberately creating that situation is called stalking. However, the favorite method of warriors is recapitulation. Recapitulation stops the mind in a natural way. The main detonators of our thoughts are pending matters, expectations, and defense of the ego. It is very difficult to find a person whose internal dialogue is sincere. Usually we hide our frustrations and go to the opposite extreme. The content of our mind turns into an ode to me. To recapitulate puts an end to all that. After a time of sustained effort, something crystallizes there inside. The habitual dialogue becomes incoherent, uncomfortable. The only remedy is to stop it. An apprentice in this phase will normally find himself facing a crossfire. On the one hand is the homogenization of his assemblage point, and on the other, some enormous parentheses of silence which strain through his mind, breaking it into fragments. When the inertia of the internal dialogue is broken, the world is made over and becomes new. The wave of energy feels like an unbearable vacuum opening under his feet. Because of this, a warrior may spend years in an unstable state of mind. The only thing that comforts him in such a situation is to keep the purpose of his path clear to himself and not lose under any circumstances his perspective of freedom. An impeccable warrior never loses his sanity. If, when applying some of these techniques, warriors feel that their minds shiver and a voice that is not the habitual one begins to whisper things to them, that is normal, and they should not be scared. They are not going mad. They are entering into the consensus of sorcerers. They asked him if moving the assemblage point also attracts silence. He answered, "It is the opposite. Inner silence induces displacements of the assemblage point, and these displacements are cumulative. Once a certain threshold is reached, silence can move the point a great distance by itself, but not before." He explained that the force of collective consent creates a certain inertia that varies from person to person, according to their energetic characteristics. Resistance to the world's description can vary from some seconds to 1 hour or more, but it is not eternal. To conquer it by means of a sustained intent is what sorcerers call arriving at the threshold of silence. That rupture is felt physically as a crack in the base of the skull or as the sound of a bell. From that starting point, it becomes a matter of how much power has been accumulated. There are those who have stopped their dialogue for some seconds and immediately get scared, begin to wonder about things or describe what they feel to themselves. Others learn how to remain in that state for hours or days, and they even use it for useful activities. For example, there you have my books on Don Juan's demand. I have written them from a basic state of silence. But experienced sorcerers go even further than that. They can enter the other world in a definite form. I met a warrior who lived there almost permanently. When I asked him something, he answered by telling me what he was seeing, without caring if that answer was coherent with my question. He lived beyond my syntax. From my apprentice point of view, of course, he was crazy. In spite of its indefinable nature, we can measure silence through its results. Its final effect, the one that sorcerers look for with avidity, is that it brings us in tune with a magnificent dimension of our being, where we have access to an instantaneous and total knowledge that is composed not of reasons, but of certainties. Old traditions describe that state as the kingdom of heaven, but sorcerers prefer to give it a less personal name: silent knowledge. You can say that a man who controls silence has cleansed his bond with the spirit, and power rains down on him in streams. A snap of the fingers, pow, and the world is another. Don Juan referred to that state as the deadly somersault of thought, because we begin in the everyday world, but we never return there again. The strange power of fascination that Carlos's talks had on me made the mere idea of missing one of those encounters unbearably painful. I remarked on it once, and he responded, "You are already hooked." Don Juan always incited everyone who surrounded him to have a romance with knowledge. I asked him what he meant. He explained, "It is the pure desire to know, not to feel apathy, to be vividly interested in what the Spirit comes to tell you, without expecting anything from it. Having a passionate romance with knowledge is the only thing that can give us the power we need to falter when signs are pointing in the direction of the unknown. When his path no longer corresponds to human expectations, when it takes him to situations that challenge his reason, then we can say that a warrior has begun an intimate relationship with knowledge. You have had extraordinary luck silencing your mind for a moment and allowing power to point you out. But that is not enough. Now you have to adjust yourself to its message so that your life becomes the life of a warrior. From now on, your work will consist on cultivating an honest and clean bond with infinity."